Hello and welcome to everyone to another exciting edition of the Magic Sandwich Show, where I'm joined. It looks like a lonely panel, doesn't it? I'm joined only by Ozzy, but it's a huge pleasure to have Ozzy, who I'm sure needs no introduction. He's been a regular panelist on the show for some weeks. There are a number of issues that we'll be discussing this evening, including the forthcoming MSF Doctors Without Borders charity event, which will be taking place in 2 weeks' time. In fact, in 2 weeks' time, it will all be over, which is frightening to think about. There's so much still left for me to organise. But we'll come on to details about that in due course. But more pressingly, Ozzy has kindly appeared to agree, despite the fact that he's also got another engagement later on today. And this sort of like segues onto one of the points that I hope to discuss this evening. But there are a couple of others. We've got one caller lined up who will be coming to shortly. But the topic that I wanted to raise before we go to Ozzy, hopefully this will stimulate some interest in the audience and hopefully some callers, because we'd like to know what you think. Recently, as I'm sure you're all aware, a journalist was killed quite brutally by the organisation known as the Islamic State, formerly known as ISIS. And footage of this killing was initially available on YouTube, posted by people obviously in support of the organisation. And it struck me that this sort of exposure could be a two-edged sword. That is to say, it may give support to some for the Islamic movement, but at the same time I can see it could backfire. That is to say that this sort of footage could be persuasive ammunition for governments such as the United States, United Kingdom and other countries to persuade the public that taking action, military action against ISIS is a good thing. So my general question, just to kick off with, is the showing of this footage a good thing or a bad thing? And interestingly enough, I'll just add one more thing to that. In this country, whilst I think it is bad legal advice, the Metropolitan Police, who are trying to investigate who is responsible for this murder, have said that anyone who watches this, or distributes it, or downloads it, could be guilty of a criminal offence. So my second question is, do you think that viewing this should be a criminal offence? Downloading it is a criminal offence, or distributing it is a criminal offence? I'd be interested in your views on that. But before we go there, as I say, Ozzy has kindly agreed to join us, despite the fact that he's got a further commitment on an internet show later on today. Ozzy, tell us a little bit about that.
Sure, thank you. And it's no hardship to be here joining you on the Magic Sandwich Show. It's always a pleasure to do it. And my other engagement is actually a few hours away. I'm appearing on an online show called The Place, that's hosted by and broadcast by the New Covenant group. And the featured guest tonight is going to be none other than Concordance. It's someone that they've wanted to have on the show for quite some time, and oddly enough, he agreed to do it because someone made a video. A fan of Concordance's YouTube channel, who is a member of the New Covenant group, uploaded a video to his own channel. This fellow's name is Evitable, the YouTuber Evitable Replicator, made a video where he was quoting me talking about Concordance. I was sort of singing the praises of Concordance in another hangout. He took a video clip of that and made it a kind of like an homage to Concordance. So it was me talking about Concordance. He uploaded that to his channel. And I asked if I could mirror that on my channel because I liked what I had to say about Concordance. I'm a great admirer of what he's contributed to the great debate and to the promotion of skepticism. And so I wanted to upload this to my own channel. He said, sure, you can mirror this little video to your channel on condition that you see if you can get Concordance to appear on The Place at the New Covenant group, because I'm a panelist here sometimes. So I said I would, and so I contacted him, and this other fellow tagged him in the video so that Concordance would see it. he saw the video. I guess he was very flattered, and he agreed to do it. So, Concordance is going to be appearing on The Place tonight on the New Covenant group. You can find it by looking for the YouTube channel The New Covenant Group. The New Covenant Group is a group of theists, atheists, agnostics, and deists who come together regularly in hangouts, on shows, and on their Facebook page called the Cult of Honesty, where they just discuss their views. The rule is you don't try to convert or deconvert, but we argue and debate our positions. So he's going to be appearing on The Place tonight, and the topic is going to be how science undermines fundamental religion, fundamentalism. So everyone there is looking forward to that. It's going to be at 9 p.m. Eastern or 8 p.m. Central. If you're in the UK, that would be about 2 a.m., so it's quite late there. But everyone's looking forward to this with some anticipation. I know I certainly am. It's going to be really interesting, picking his brain on how he sees the relationships between science and fundamentalism, and how he thinks his own work and contributions on YouTube and on his blog are sort of working to sort of loosen the grip of fundamentalism on people. And speak of the devil, he appears.
Can you guys hear me now? No.
Yes, I heard you, Concordance.
All right.
Yeah, we can hear you.
DPR, things seem to go silent for me.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes.
Much better. Okay. Yeah, my apologies. I just walked in.
Not a
I
problem.
was just singing praises.
Well, I wasn't. Ozzy was. But yeah, just recap briefly on what you were saying, Ozzy, so Concordance has an opportunity to come up to speed, so to speak.
Oh, okay. Concordance, I was just explaining that you were going to be appearing on The Place on the New Covenant group tonight at 9 p.m. Eastern to discuss how science undermines fundamentalism, and I also sort of told the story of how that came to be.
Yes. So that was with Evite, I believe. Is it Evite or Evitable?
Evitable Replicator is the YouTuber that made that little tribute, that little homage to you, that sort of caught your eye. So everyone over at the New Covenant group is really quite excited that you're going to be appearing on the show.
I am as well. Yeah, I was actually preparing for it this morning a little bit, thinking about what I'm going to say and how I'm going to say it. I'm not that eloquent live, so I have to do a little preparation.
Well, it's a pretty warm and friendly and receptive atmosphere. The questions, no one's going to be, well, I don't know, there could be some challenging questions, but I mean, everyone there is sort of excited to have you, so I don't think that they're going to be grilling you or anything like that. I think they really just want to pick your brain and hear what you have to say on the matter.
I was told that it was a place for self-hating atheists.
And well, I'm one of the people who participates in their shows and on their Facebook page quite regularly. So I guess I'd have to be described as a self-hating atheist.
It's quite an interesting group. At first, I was convinced they were sort of a new age kind of religious, spiritual kind of group, but they seem to veer just shy of that, I would say, towards being more evidence-based and embracing the idea of doubt as a philosophical position, and that's something I can get behind. If it was going to be like the Great Spirit shines down upon us all, I wasn't going to have very much to say long term, but they seem to be a group that are quite prepared to abandon labels and simply talk about how we think about the things we think about.
Yeah, that's actually a very good way of characterizing it. For those who don't know, it's founded by Dr. Michael W. Jones, who's a a linguist, a specialist in ancient Koine Greek, and a Bible translator, and his wife Rhonda Jones. The show is usually co-hosted by a fellow who goes by the name of the Unconventional Pastor, Bob Graves, they're sort of the architects of this show and this network, and they're former fundamentalists. They're not fundamentalists now. They're awfully long way from that now. In fact, they really have no great love for fundamentalism, and are sort of trying to help people who are in the grips of fundamentalism find their way out of it to either more rational versions of theism and religiosity, or all the way out into atheism. Because I mean, I sort of do truck with them all the time, and no one has ever tried to sort of talk me into religion or anything like that. So that's just not their shtick. They're not trying to talk people into religiosity.
I'm just trying to figure out why it is that I associate that group with negative connotations.
You're thinking of a different group. I know who you're thinking of. I do.
Which was a group that had Saiten on as a guest and threw them off?
Oh no, that's them.
That's them. Yeah, they kicked him off.
Yeah, well, it is then the same group, because the criticism that I've heard is that they are putting forward this softly, nicely approach, and we can all get along, and let's avoid all the disagreements and just find room for agreement, which I guess is okay to a degree, but they seem to be, I suppose a criticism would be they're trying to brush under the carpet any sort of disagreements and just say, yeah, those aren't important.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I would agree with that.
Yeah, no. If that's what it was about, I wouldn't have any part in it. I wouldn't be participating in their shows and in their Facebook page. I mean, they do encourage people to set aside the labels and to set aside their animosity and their emotionalism and just try to think and try to argue and put forward their positions. And above all, don't play hide the ball with what you believe. You know, straightforwardly put on the table what it is that you think and what you believe, and disagree without being disagreeable. There are actually very few people who are sort of stridently religious on there, because such people have a tendency to be unable to be disagreeing without being disagreeable. Many people are simply not able to have a conversation with someone who is not of their faith without trying to indoctrinate them and convert them. And so such people it's a kind of self-selecting sample. Those people select themselves out, and the people who are left are the people with whom you can have actually quite profitable discussions. I mean, there are people from all walks of life and all types of educational levels and interests and backgrounds. So it's kind of a very interesting mixed group. I find it really interesting. It's very stimulating. You know, there are people with whom you can have really excellent conversations with there. You can also have bad conversations. You've got to sort of pick and choose what discussions you want to join into, but it's certainly not the case that they're trying to sweep under the rug people's differences. What they're trying to get people to do is to say, let's talk about our differences. Can't we just actually talk about them? Or do we have to always yell? Surely we can talk about them. Civilization, the future of civilization rests on the ability to have conversations with people that you disagree with. I see myself as having more in common with religious people of that mindset than I do with any kind of fundamentalism, and I'm actually happy to encourage those people to have dialogue with people like me, who's an atheist and an anti-theist, than if they feel a closer affinity to the other side. I mean, if I'm sort of in the face, angrily yelling or refusing to have any truck or contact with people like that, then they're going to end up feeling a greater affinity for what I think are sort of the more dangerous religious elements out there. So I think it's to the interests of those of us pushing for secularism and decreasing the influence of religiosity to enter into discourse with people who are of a more moderate faith, while not hiding the fact that, at least in my case, that I think that religious moderation is not a great thing either. and that it creates an awful lot of space and elbow room for fundamentalism. That's the kind of thing you can say right to their face, and they don't lose their hair over the kind of thing. You know, you can actually have discussions where you can make very, very pointed accusations and complaints, provided that you don't get accusatory and treat the person that you're talking to as if they're some kind of moral monster, and they return the favor. They don't treat me like I'm some, pagan person sacrificing people on altars or something like that. You know, so mutual respect is afforded, and I find that quite an enjoyable and refreshing thing.
I think there's obviously a difference between mutual respect, respect for the person, and respect for their views. I would certainly accept that, but I suppose maybe I've been tainted by too many harsh experiences on YouTube, where you seem to be addressing or dealing with people who are so obstinate that you reach the conclusion that any sort of discourse is going to be a waste of time. Do you think that's a valid position to take? Do you think there are some people that cannot be reached at all?
Oh, absolutely.
Dialogue?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't waste my time talking to those people.
Let me come back on that real quickly, and it's something that I've been thinking about quite a bit. And there really is no point in trying to convince people of things, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't have the discussion. You know, sharing viewpoints has validity as well, if only to educate us about what other people think and why they think that. If you always want to expose your ideas to conflicting ideas, whether you do it in a public forum or you do it privately in exchanges, I don't think there's ever any harm in discussing why people think the crazy things that they think, or the rational things they think, because that shapes you as a person to be able to engage in those discussions. We've had creationists on here, we've had apologists on this show, and I think people can come away from those discussions in a productive way. The only point where I don't think it's even worthwhile talking to someone is when they're not interested in actually engaging with you, when the only point of talking is to have a chance to yell at each other, and we see that on TV all the time, rather than some discussion of policy or some real investigation into conflicting opinions. You get this sort of shouting match going, and that's what I'm not interested in. That's what I think is a waste even of my time. But as long as both sides are at least allowing the other to speak, at least looking at the other guy's lips while they wait for him to finish so that they can talk, that's still somewhat productive.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that. Oh, sorry, go ahead, DPR.
Yeah, no, I was waiting for you to respond, so you go ahead.
Oh, well, I was going to say I'd second everything that Concords was saying there. And I would add that when you have these discussions, as we do over at the New Covenant Group, you're doing them in public. You're doing it on an open Facebook page that anybody can join. It's not a secret group or anything like that. Anybody can join the Cult of Honesty Facebook page. People can comment under the videos. People can join their hangouts. They have a weekly hangout every Wednesday night and Saturday night called the Cult of Honesty Hangout. And so people are able to join the conversation and view the conversations, participate in text or live or on their shows, and consequently your ideas get out there. So I mean, I think I've sort of actually done an awful lot to sort of promote what I think is a very rational, not especially emotional expression of atheism to a group of people, many of whom are right on the fence. A lot of them are just sort of finding their way out of religion, but they're sort of clinging, and they're worried. They have the questions that people who are sort of falling out of fundamentalism will tend to have. What's the meaning of life? Where does morality come from? How do you answer the big questions about origins and things like that? And what about evolution? And right, well, I mean, this is a place where you can actually have a civil conversation where those people feel that they can have a conversation without being accused of being stupid and backward. And so, I mean, you can actually sort of make gains there from the standpoint of of moving people towards atheism if that's your goal. But I mean, I think the way to do that is really to just sort of present the rational face of skepticism, secularism, and atheism, not to sell atheism, not to try to convert people to atheism or deconvert them from their religion, but just sort of try to be a model of rationality and respectability. Because one of the things that we suffer from the most in the atheist community is the stereotype of the angry, embittered atheist. And that is unfortunately a very accurate stereotype. An awful lot of us are, because many of us who've fallen out of our religion and found our way into atheism, as I did, we are bitter for a while. We are angry. We feel like we've been conned and duped and lied to. And that's why so many people who are atheists are really outraged, and it can last for many years. And that fact, that sociological fact about that particular demographic of atheists means that there's something to this stereotype that people can actually point to. And for many people who are religious or slightly religious or agnostic, it helps if they can actually have discussions with people that are sober and calm and respectful, where people are trying their best to be rational. If they can see a model of that, they can go, oh, I see. And the stereotype of the angry, embittered atheist who is just an anti-religious bigot who hates the religious, that stereotype can just can evaporate in their minds. So I think that there's a lot of value there. Plus, you're making your arguments in public. And if they're rational arguments, well, that should win the day to the extent that they have any respect for rationality and reason.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't consider it even a minor goal of mine to convert people to non-belief. It doesn't seem like a desirable goal necessarily. To me, it's much more about the process, the journey, the methodology that people use to approach ideas which they are challenged by. I would rather have a skeptical theist than a non-skeptical atheist. I would rather have someone who, has made a conscious decision to care about what is true, has followed a consistent frame of or maybe process of understanding that is based on fearlessly investigating what reality can support. I've seen rebellious atheists, people who are so angry at the harms that organized religion has done that they swing to this opposite pole. I think it's a very common thing to start people down, and some of them discover a process along the way or are exposed to people who can teach them those things. But I would much rather have people who are thoughtful on either side of the debate than to have radicals of any kind, or people who come by the wrong path, who are simply reacting to something else.
Yeah, a world of non-religious people who are no more rational, no more skeptical, no more beholden to the norms of rational and civil discourse. That won't be a better world. That's not a better world. I don't want to live in a world where it's all New Age woo instead of Catholicism or religious fundamentalism. That's not going to be a more rational world. That's not going to be a less dangerous world in the long run. There might be some pernicious practices that will disappear, but there'll be other stupid practices that will crop up. So yeah, I agree completely. I mean, what you want is people who are committed to rationality and have a respect for reasons and evidence, and who are not beholden to a faith-based epistemological view. That's what you want to get away from. And of course, simply not believing in God doesn't make you more rational. One's really got nothing to do with the other. The only sense in which one has to do with the other is, I think, on average, if to the extent that people are rational and reasonable, I think that they will come to repudiate superstitious thinking, and so they will tend gradually towards atheism. And so, like you, I don't lobby or petition or agitate for atheism. I think it just comes about as a byproduct which I think is the more honest way to come by it, rather than a kind of allegiance to the idea of atheism. That, I think, is actually not any better than an allegiance to any particular theism.
I think this is part of why people object to the mere idea of something like atheism plus, which is sort of positions you must hold to belong. You know, it's the beginning of a dogma. These are positions which are unassailable. We cannot challenge the ideas of you know, total equality or, you know, left-leaning politics. These are what it is required to be a good atheist, to be part of the movement. And that, of course, for a lot of people is a little bit too restrictive. It says these are positions which you may not apply your skepticism to. And ironically, the atheism side of the secular movement, you know, the atheist and skeptical camps, quite often the atheists have targeted the skeptic side for not being skeptical about religious claims, for restricting themselves to UFOs and Bigfoot and alien abductions. That both sides are saying sort of to the other that you're not being consistent, and there's a hypocrisy there. And I would somewhat agree to sort of both sides. I think there is a consistent position, there's a consistent process, but what I hope never comes out of this movement is the idea that you must hold this position to be respected, or to be allowed to attend a conference, or to be invited to be a speaker. And these sort of litmus tests on conclusions really bother me in a movement that I think should be unified over process and methodology instead.
Yeah, I absolutely concur with that. I mean, a short way of putting it would be, for me, would be my enemy isn't theism per se. My enemies here are irrationality and dogmatism. And of course, you can be an irrational dogmatism and be an atheist. And so if you repudiate dogmatism and you repudiate irrationality, that's great, but you can't repudiate that in name only. You actually have to know something about critical thinking, logic, the history of ideas, and science. You actually have to have some understanding of these domains. Those are the tools in the toolbox. And without such an understanding, you're not even in a position to repudiate irrationality and dogmatism and embrace rationalism and critical thinking. You need the tools of critical thinking and rationality. There's actually a positive domain of knowledge here that has to be mastered, and you don't simply acquire that by shedding your religion.
And let me take the counter to both of our positions, I think, which is that activism doesn't fit well for process. You can't have process activism. You almost have to have methodological activism. And there needs to be someone to stand up to religious people who are manipulating our social structure, our societies, and the way our societies are structured. There does have to be someone who is willing to, you know, throw their voice behind anti-theistic messages, anti-religious messages. You know, great harm is being done by faith healing, right? Great harm is being done by, and they can't take this ambivalent academic position that, you know, if we just taught everyone skeptical thinking and held hands around the world, you know, the world's problems would be solved. So I think there's room for both sort of pure skeptical, secular, whatever, and then there's also, I think, some role for people who are not dogmatic but have a real purity of purpose in order to get an effective message out to institute social change. So what do you think of that, Ozzy? How do you balance those two?
I don't know. I think the balance kind of comes naturally. Part of the difficulty, though, is that to be an effective activist, for secularism and the repudiation of religious dogmatism in particular, you kind of have to be angry about it. You have to be outraged about it. That's really the only thing that's going to get you up every morning and fight the good fight. If it's not pissing you off, you're really going to have a hard time motivating yourself to put in the work that someone like Aaron Ra does. I mean, it's not a little thing that he does, or Matt Dillahunty. They go in there and they grit their teeth, and they encounter some of the stupidest, most stubborn, and sometimes intellectually dishonest people you're ever going to encounter. And that's not an easy thing to do that. It takes a certain kind of character and a certain kind of disposition, a certain kind of strength and force of personality, which someone like Matt Dillahunty and Aaron Ra both have aplenty. Really, I think that we have to play to our strengths. So I think the balance for me is easy. I'm not a strong, in-your-face kind of activist because it just doesn't sort well with my character. But I play to my strengths, and I have different interests and different area of expertise that allows me to sort of sell and communicate and model what I think is rationality and skepticism and intellectual fair-mindedness and what I think is open-mindedness. But that doesn't make me sort of the best champion to point out the sort of egregious dogmatism and incursions on our liberties that the religious are guilty of. I mean, I am not the best person for that, but there are people who are excellent at that, and I mean that in itself, knowing what they're doing, what those people are doing on the other side of the fence, keeping abreast of that, knowing what people are trying to do with high school textbooks and the legal system, things like that. That's a domain of knowledge, and you have to be kind of angry and outraged to do that. And so I think it has to do a lot with temperament. But those people who do that need to make sure that they are, in fact, that they have the critical thinking skills and the tools, that they have done their homework and are behaving in ways that are epistemologically responsible, and that they know how to sort through their belief and revise their beliefs and not merely talk the talk. They've got to actually be able to do that. And not everybody in this movement is able to do that, but that it's important that people be able to do that. So, I mean, there's no recipe here because so much of it depends on your disposition, your temperament, your background knowledge, and what you're sort of well suited for in this thing. This is a war of ideas as I see it, and it has to be fought on many fronts. And not everyone is going to be equally good at every task. So I sometimes am faulted for not being sort of in your face enough and confrontational enough. But I mean, I would suck at that. It just doesn't sort well with my character. It's just not the kind of person I am. But I mean, I think I bring other things to it. And then I hear someone like Aaron Ra or Matt Dillahunty faulted all the time for sort of not being open enough, not lending an ear enough. They're sort of set on send, on broadcast the message, and they're not receiving enough. But well, we need that too, though. I mean, it's not because they're closed-minded. It's because they have a different priority, and it's something that they happen to be good at. Someone's got to sort of lead that charge, but that's not the only job there is to do. So that's how I see the balance. The balance is play to your own strengths, and don't try to do every job, and don't try to be a firebrand if that's not what you are, and don't try to sort of be sort of more conciliatory and dispassionate and cerebral the way I sometimes come off to people, unless that sorts with your character, right? I mean, there's more than one way to skin this cat.
Let me throw something out there as a statement that and that is that scientists cannot be activists. They cannot have this strong impetus towards one particular side because it absolutely ruins their ability to be dispassionate, to be truly advocates for the truth. What's your response to that?
No, I agree with that completely. I mean, this is sort of a mistake that Richard Dawkins has made, actually. While I'm grateful to someone like Richard Dawkins for everything that he's done for the atheist movement, his celebrity and stature within the scientific community is what made it possible for him to be an important outspoken figure for atheism. But unfortunately, there's a downside to that, and that is the more he is talking about that and the less about science, the more in the minds of many, many people he is diminished as someone who is dispassionate and fair-minded. And really, I think that what science does, when people study science, and I would say the same thing about philosophy, but not theology. But what I think science and something like analytic philosophy does is it trains your mind. It engenders habits of mind, a way of thinking, a disposition for looking at the world such that you're looking for truth, and you hold your beliefs at arm's length. You hold your beliefs provisionally, and you're prepared to take everything that you believe now and treat it provisionally and somewhat hypothetically. That is something that I think gets pickled into scientists. And to the extent that that happens, it sort of affects all of your personality and all of your psychology. And I think it's hard to be a truly good scientist, a truly dispassionate scientist. And by dispassionate, I don't mean cold and bloodless. I mean someone who is, in fact, able to analytically look at the information. And this professional training permeates everything, and as soon as you become too involved in activism, I think you're undoing this other tendency that you have cultivated and trained for the whole of your professional career. I think that these two things, activism, political activism, and a commitment to certain conclusions and ideological goals, and a dispassionate and disinterested pursuit of truth, these two things exist in tension. And so I think actually that if you're a scientist, you should that's what you should be doing. If you're good at that, and you're trained at that, it's not especially important that you be an activist. There are other people who can be activists who lack that other kind of training. But you can discredit yourself professionally, and I think you can even sort of undermine your own ability to assess information by being an activist.
There's a scientist who studies the health impacts of GMO. He's an advocate against GMOs. The last name is Seralini, and any paper that is written by this group, even anywhere at the same institution, is now suspect because we've seen data shaded one way or the other. Andrew Wakefield, another example of someone who had financial interests as well as I would say political aspirations around vaccines, and Andrew Wakefield managed to turn data out of nothing. He created the data essentially from the noise and background that were produced by his instrument. So it's not even that it makes you an ineffective advocate unless you're advocating for scientific accuracy or you're advocating well outside your area of expertise. It calls into question your ability to be impartial with regards to the results that you're producing. So it weakens your scientific value to be publicly seen to advocate for one particular outcome. And isn't that what we've said sort of all along is wrong with apologetics and creationism and science denialism, is they decide what conclusion they will come to first and then connect the dots until they're there. They work the scientific process in exactly the opposite direction. They start with conclusion and then they work their way back to evidence in order to support that conclusion. Right? And the scientific process should always be one where we let the evidence speak for itself, where we expose these ideas to the danger of being falsified. An advocate will be reluctant to do so. This is not to say that scientists, let's say someone studying malaria, cannot advocate for, anti-malarial practices. I mean, advocate scientifically based public health measures. But they can't adopt their own particular cure, their own particular prevention method or diagnostic in a way that doesn't expose that idea to additional falsification. It makes them suspect from both directions, as activists and also as scientists. So it's an unfortunate thing, and I think, DPR, you wanted to rephrase this question before I go on. Is that right?
I'm not sure that I did, and if I did, it's so long ago that I can't remember. But just a couple of comments, and I haven't looked into the New Covenant group sufficiently myself, but as I say, my views have probably been tarnished, perhaps incorrectly, by the views of others who I've heard. But someone has commented in the chat, "I can't stand the New Covenant group, a bunch of sanctimonious, holier-than-thou pieces of annoying garbage. I don't even care if Concordance becomes a guest on there." And that's the kind of view that I had of them, and I can't justify it. I have to say I can't justify it on the hoof why I held this somewhat negative opinion of the New Covenant group. All I can explain is it's because I know that I've heard so many bad things about them. But leave that aside. You're on the show, as is Ozzy later on today. What is the topic, and what are you going to be discussing?
Yeah, I think we said earlier, I think Ozzy said earlier, that it's how science threatens dogmatic religion. We'll be talking a little bit about why it is that dogmatic religion cannot tolerate free and open science. Where does that threaten them? Of course, I won't make any effort to make them terribly comfortable about the issue. In fact, science can threaten all religion. It can threaten any metaphysical model that invokes any kind of tangible effect from a deity, because those tangible effects are subject to investigation and testing and falsification. And that's really, unfortunately, going to be, I think, a point of contention. But yeah, that's the general idea. It's tonight at Ozzy. Can you help me out?
It's 9 p.m. Eastern, 8 p.m. Central.
Yeah.
And if you're in the UK, that'll be about 2 a.m. And then even later as you move across the continent.
If you want to post a link to it in the YouTube chat, please do. I'm sorry if I seem somewhat distracted this evening. It's because I'm trying to run this as the charity event will be run in 2 weeks' time, and it's not meeting up to my aspirations, and the problems that I thought we may have overcome don't appear to have been overcome in the way I'm doing it. But let's leave that aside for the moment. We do have someone that would like to join us, and in the meantime, gentlemen, can I invite you both to look at the message I posted in the chat to you? That was posted by Quantum Overlord. And whilst I bring in the next caller, perhaps you'd like to read that and maybe address it if you want to. Or someone could read it out for me as I try and multitask.
Sure. The question reads, I'm interested to know if you guys think that in some ways this means the death of any entitlement to an opinion, unless you are in a position of knowledge, which virtually no one is. I find this idea somewhat depressing, but true. Also, are you guys empiricists? I'm a little puzzled actually about this. I'm interested to know if you guys think that in some ways this means the death of any entitlement to an opinion. I'm not sure what the this is. I guess perhaps Quantum Overlord is asking about.
Yeah, the question came in a few moments ago, and I apologise. I can't remember exactly when and what it was referring to, but I think it was basically in response to my suggestion that how can you have constructive dialogue when you know there is a fundamental disagreement between the two of you, and should you all be nice and courteous to each other? I think that's what he means, but Quantum, if I've got that wrong, please send me another message or join us for live. I can send you a link if you'd like. Just message me. I'm sorry, I've lost the. I'm doing such a bad job tonight. I've lost the link, so it was taking me a few seconds to get into get the link to the next or the first caller. But just dealing with the final thing, Ozzy, which was.
Are we empiricists?
Yes.
Well, it depends.
I'm sure you can deal with.
It depends what you mean by empiricist. I mean, there was a tradition within philosophy called empiricism. It starts with people like Francis Bacon. It moves forward into people like John Locke, David Hume, Bishop Berkeley, and that's the idea that that's strict empiricism. The idea that all knowledge comes strictly through the senses. Empiricism refers to the empire of the senses. That's the empiricism, the empire of the senses, and that there's no innate knowledge, and there's no other kind of knowledge but knowledge that is delivered to us through our senses. That's in contradistinction to a tradition within philosophy and science that also granted that there was another kind of knowledge, sometimes called apodictic knowledge or a priori knowledge. Things like knowledge of mathematics and knowledge of formal logic, and these are not things that the truths of things like logic and math and set theory and geometry. The truths of these things are not guaranteed by looking at the world. Mathematicians don't sort of derive or develop a new mathematical proof for something and then say, oh, well, let's check to see if it matches up with the world. No, they don't have to. That's not how it works in formal disciplines. So empiricism was an intellectual tradition that tried to understand even that kind of knowledge as ultimately derivative from the senses. It was not a particularly successful project, but so that's one view of empiricism. That's one meaning of empiricism. I am not that kind of empiricist. However, if you mean, do I think that the most secure knowledge that we can obtain is delivered to us by the senses? Yes, I actually think that is the case, and I think that no responsible philosophy can be done without consulting what's delivered to us through our senses in concert with our reason. In other words, philosophy has to start from what science can tell us. That is, in fact, a tradition of philosophy that has gone back, well, at least as far as Aristotle, and we find it, in people like Descartes and Hume and others, a view that you don't do philosophy just from your armchair. You actually consult reality. So now there's another tradition of philosophy that does try to do everything from the armchair. And that has a tendency to uncouple one's conclusions from reality, and people go spinning off in all kinds of bizarre metaphysical directions, and posit all kinds of extravagancies that cannot be grounded in anything that we can trust. That is the kind of philosophy that I would have no truck with, that most people in the analytic, the Anglo-American tradition of philosophy would have no truck with. So in some sense, I am an empiricist, but it depends again on what you mean by empiricism. But yeah, broadly speaking, I would say I'm an empiricist, but not the strict empiricism that came to us through the line of Bacon and Locke and Hume and Berkeley and that tradition.
Yeah, I don't know. Is anyone actually an empiricist? Is that a real philosophical position that people take now?
No, not anymore. No.
I don't think so. I think that, yeah, that's kind of a 1800s kind of position, but yeah, I would consider myself to be someone who values empiricism as a methodology for certain problems, but certainly not at all. Yeah.
Okay, on that note, let's welcome our first caller, Norbert.
Hi.
Are you with us? Hi, how are you doing?
Can you hear me?
Perfectly well, yes. What have you got for us?
Awesome. Hi, guys. I'm from Budapest, Hungary, and I just wanted to share with you guys some of the things that I found strange when I started to look for check the videos on YouTube about atheism. And coming from Eastern Europe, where in the Eastern Bloc there were no, the religion was not really a big thing. One of the things that I find interesting in these religious debates is that, for me, the question, how can you have any kind of morality if you don't believe in God, is just simply, I just can't understand the question. It's for someone who never had any religious dogma in the background in their lives, this question, and in the community as well, it's just a very, very strange question, and it took me a lot of debate videos to figure out what they actually mean when they ask this morality question. So it's one of the most interesting things about my explorations was that this is actually a valid question and issue in countries where religion is more important, more prominent. So I can understand some of the debaters also state that this question might not have any meaning, but for me, it's actually, it took some time to realize what they mean by that. And you have to know that it was not, it was not homogeneous in the Eastern Bloc, in the communist countries, about the attitude towards religion. If you check Poland, for example, which is a deeply, deeply Catholic country, it wasn't that much oppressed, or it wasn't that, they were not dragging of people to the gulags or anything. So every country was a little bit different. And the other interesting observation that I had was that when I figured out that in the West, the Cold War shifted this towards this "in God we trust" thing, that it got put on the money. And
well, before you move on to that, because let's deal with the first issue, because I think that's an important one. Can you be moral without God? And I understand what you mean, that you didn't understand the question, although the words of the question make perfect sense. It's one that you just think, where are you coming from? I think that's the expression that you're giving. But most religious people will, when pushed, accept that atheists can be moral, but their morality is either moral because God has written it into their hearts, which the Bible sort of like contends, or alternative, they're arguing that without a God, you've got no basis for your morality. And on that particular second point, I'd like to invite Ozzy to talk to that point.
Sure. Yeah. Well, you hit the nail on the head, DPR. That's exactly right. When you talk to the average theist who tosses out this, how can you be moral? They could mean that. That's really a kind of accusation. It's not so much a question as an accusation. It is a question, but it functions like an accusation. And the question or the accusation is something along the lines of, without something to tell you that there's a God, a procedure for figuring out without something to tell you that what's right and wrong, without something like the Bible or the Quran or some other holy writ or some sort of divine revelation or some magical moral compass implanted within you, you have no way of deciding right and wrong. So one of the things that they're asking you is an epistemological question, a question of how do you know what is right and wrong? Okay, how do you decide that? As they see it, you have no basis for deciding right from wrong. Anything that you decide is either these are values that just got pickled into you, these are just preferences that got pickled into you, or worse yet, they're idiosyncratic preferences that just issue forth from you based on convenience. And of course, that would not be any kind of durable morality. That would be worrisome if someone was deciding right and wrong strictly out of what was in their immediate self-interest from one moment to the next. And so that's how some people see it, as an epistemological question. Where do you get your knowledge of right and wrong from? If you don't have some book or some set of divine instructions, how do you do this? And the other question, now that's what some people are asking, and that's not a very sophisticated objection. But the bigger challenge for those of us in the atheist community who want to sort of address this concern is the ontological question, the question of what makes something right or wrong. What kind of property is there in an action that makes an action a good action, a right action, as opposed to a bad or immoral action? And it's actually a very difficult question to answer. It's so difficult, unfortunately, that something like divine command theory, which many religious people naively think answers the question, well, it doesn't answer the question. Positing that a God is going to, by his commands, going to be able to make good and bad come into existence simply by issuing commands doesn't make much sense. Really what you've done there is you've simply outsourced the preferences and reasons for right and wrong that you think you have to some other metaphysical being. That doesn't answer the question at all, but a lot of people think it does. But it's still a hard question. What makes something right or wrong? What is it? What is the ingredient, or what are the ingredients in an action that make an action right or wrong? That is a deep philosophical question. It's a question that moral philosophers and ethicists have contended with for literally millennia. It's not a question to be taken lightly. It's not a question to be answered by simply saying, "Oh well, we have pro-social instincts and pro-social emotions like empathy and a disposition towards cooperation, mutualism, reciprocity. Those are all true, but of course we have other natural dispositions and instincts that are antisocial, things like xenophobia and selfishness and greed. Those too are part of human nature. So you can't simply appeal to human nature to solve this problem. There obviously more is needed here, and that takes a lot of work. I mean, basically one has to sort of crack open a book of moral philosophy to at least get acquainted with what some of the positions are and what some of the standard objections are and what some of the standard moves are. Whether you want to go with a deontological theory or a utilitarian theory, a eudaimonian virtue-based ethic, or something else. So that is the how do you know what's right and wrong is an important question, but the deeper question is what makes something right and wrong. That's the ontological question. That is really the important apologetical question that people are asking, and both of them deserve serious contemplation before you try and answer them. Most of us feel, because we have moral intuitions, if in any given circumstance, if I ask you, is this right or wrong, chances are some sense of, yeah, that's right or that's wrong is going to bubble up inside of you. And every once in a while you can stump a person with a moral dilemma where they sort of feel divided. But most of the time we sort of have a clear impulse or intuition in direction of one or the other. And so we think that because this issues forth quite effortlessly in us, that we must have some tacit theory that we're employing, and we're just having a hard time to articulate it. But in fact, moral intuitions are full of inconsistencies, and it behooves us as skeptics and rational people to try to sift through this and figure out what actually is the basis of our moral decision making, and to be honest about it, not to just pick a moral theory simply because it seems easy to articulate. That's no different than picking trying to pick between two theories on the basis that one is easier to express. That doesn't make the better theory. It's got to fit the facts. So it's actually a very, very hard and serious question. I mean, I have my views on the matter, but if I were to put them forth here, it would take an awfully long time to explain and justify. And it might not be compelling, or it might be compelling. But in any case, this is something that people have to sort of sort through on their own, and that takes a bit of reading.
I think that's That's the very deep intellectual answer. I do. It is a very complicated question, but I think when you're talking with the average Christian, what they're really indicating here is that the Bible tells us what we should do to live a good life, right? And in most cases, these are people who have not really examined what the Bible calls moral and immoral actions, allowed and forbidden actions. Because if they had, they wouldn't be walking around doing the things that they're doing, and that what Christians are actually drawing on when they determine what is moral and immoral is also not Scripture, is also not what is commanded by God in the Bible. Some of the things in there are contradictory. They're ridiculously based on minutia. They're, you know, what most people are talking about when they ask you this casual question is, how can you live your life in a moral way without reading Leviticus, without obeying the law of Micah? How can you, as a non-Bible believing person, know what is right and wrong without the source of the Bible? And you know, the short answer is the Bible is not really what Christians are using as the basis for their morality. If they were, they would be stoning a lot more people. Right? They would be putting a lot more people to death for what you and I would consider very minor infractions. They would still be practicing slavery. Right? We have this reinterpretation of the moral code of the Bible by much more moral people than the ones who wrote the Bible. Right? Much more moral people than the character of Jesus. People who have a deeper moral sense, at least, than imaginary literary characters. Is that what you're thinking, though, Norbert?
You might have to unmute yourself, Norbert. If you look at the row of icons at the top of the box, I might be able to do it for you. Oh, there we go. I think we've got you. Yeah. No?
He's muted again.
Let me...
Ah, there we go.
Unmute.
Well,
there we go.
There we go. Yeah. I sort of I get that what you were saying, but what I was trying to get at is that imagine that for 49 years, this for 3 generations of people at least, this was not a relevant problem. I mean, 3 generations of people were raised and lived a life without really facing this question that where do you get your morality from? The people were just indifferent towards the Bible because, you know, the state was kind of jealous of all the competition. So you can imagine that before 1989 in Eastern Europe, especially for example in Hungary, for example, if you wanted to be an influential person in politics, either local or the countrywide, you better not go to church. Which is, you know, like the opposite of what's going on in the United States, where if you don't go to church, you can't hold an office. So it was not discussed, and the average people were not really, you know, having this dilemma, and they lived their lives, and you know, the teachers were just, you know, mentioning the Bible as a historical and literal thing. So, you know, there were no issues about evolution, about the you know, the age of the earth and stuff, and this whole concept that people ask each other that, you know, where do you get your morality from, it was almost non-existent. And in the meantime, you know, it's just that there is this false concept that the atheist communism was so anti-religious, but that's you know, that's a comic book version of communism. You know, what you get from the propaganda, because every government handled religion differently, and most of them were just seeing it as the opposition party, you know, something that can manipulate crowds, so they would have to do their tricks to suppress them. But it was not, you know, an inquisition against tradition. People were going to church, and you know, you could go to Bible class, you know, private time, but you know, you better not try to be a politician or anything. So it's just very ironic that you know, the communist government was not really atheist in a sense that, you know, they had this agenda to eradicate religion. They just saw that you know, priests preaching preaching in churches can manipulate crowds, and that's, you know, that's like their subsidy. So they were trying to cut that off, and it didn't really work in Poland, where the country remained deeply Catholic, and they really have the issue with how, after the change of regime, abortion is still not handled quite right in the country. So it was just not that homogeneous, and people were fine, you know, countries were growing up and having children where this was not an issue. And ironically, and on the other hand, in Spain, in the meantime, a fascist dictator made a real pact with the church after the Civil War, and they had they kind of Franco chose the way of, you know, buying off the priests and having a fascistic dictatorship until 1975 with a nice backing from the Spanish church. So this whole notion that you know, these atheistic regimes were you know, evil because they are atheists, this is a comic book villain type of myth from the Cold War propaganda. So it was not an issue.
I think you'd reached your point. Was there a question at the end of it? Because I've got a couple of other people that I'd like to take.
No, I was just, I don't have a question. I was just thought that this is an interesting addition to how the West viewed the whole communism, atheism thing, which was, you know, not that simple and cartoonish.
I think you're probably correct, but thank you very much for your call. As I said, I've got a couple of other people I want to squeeze in, and I realise, as ever, time whizzes by towards the second half of the show. But thank you very much for your contribution.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. We should be joined now, hopefully in a few moments' time, by Quantum Overlord, who was the person that posted the question that we tried to address earlier, but he's now here to expand, I hope, slightly upon it. Quantum, are you with us?
Okay, yeah. I've only just come in there, so I'm just trying to get my thoughts together because it's about 30 seconds lag. Okay, yeah. The question. Sorry. Do you want me to clarify what I was trying to ask earlier?
Yes, please.
Okay, so I'm struggling to remember the context in which I asked the question, but the thing in general, the point I was trying to make was that unless you're in a position of knowledge, such as concurrences on biology, then it seems difficult to have an opinion on anything. So, I mean, particularly things like politicians or indeed religious people, having an opinion on anything seems dangerous because you don't have all the facts to hand. And it just seems to me that this is a rather depressing notion because everyone likes to have opinions. I like to have opinions, but it just seems that all of my opinions that I've got nothing to do with what I'm, let's say, an expert on. I won't consider myself to be an expert on anything, but it just seems
let me pause it.
Okay, yeah.
Pause it there, because I think we may be in agreement. Let's see if we are. I'm very opinionated, but I like to consider that my opinions can be justified and supported. I have an opinion about the theory of evolution, even though I understand very little about it. But I think that my opinion that it is true, it is an accurate description of the diversity of life, that it is supported by evidence, is an opinion that I can hold with justification, because I can look at the experts in the field, I can see what they have to say, I can see the agreement between experts in the field, I can see the criticisms that they receive and the way in which that criticism is responded, and I can make assessments about those matters without a full knowledge or full understanding of evolution. In times of need, if I'm in a moment of crisis and my belief in the theory of evolution is crumbling, I can turn to concordance and I can say, hang on, this creationist has made this point, what are your observations? And he will go through it and he will say, you can look at this paper, you can look at that paper, you can look at this evidence and whatever. So whilst I accept my opinion on evolution could be seen to many as an appeal to authority, I think it's one of those appeals that is justified and reasonable. And I could say, I've used evolution as an example, but I could use many other areas, medicine, mathematics, chemistry, whatever. And it doesn't have to remain in the field of sciences. It could be in the field of legal studies or many others. We all, every one of us, to a greater or lesser degree, makes appeals to authority or relies upon authority, but we do so in a justified manner. I'll give you a much more basic example. My car breaks down. I wouldn't go to concordance to tell me how to mend my car, but I'll go to the bloke on the corner of the street and say, hey, my car's broken, and he'll tell me why. That could be seen as an appeal to authority or whatever. There are, I don't have no shame in saying that I appeal to many authorities, but I hope that I do so in a justified manner. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. But I think the thing I was saying is that I mean, if I hear something on the news and I want to know whether it's true, the first place I go is Google Scholar or somewhere like that. And it seems almost a depressing state of affairs that almost all of my opinions are completely derived. I mean, and like you say, it's a completely justified stance to have. But unless I was an expert in my field, like concordance are, or like you are in, say, law, then it just seems like you can't. No one really owns their own opinions. I mean, when I was a lot younger, I would have opinions on various things, and often they would be wrong. But I suppose the price for being wrong was that sense of satisfaction for being original or having some sort of. I mean, when you write an essay on something that's supposed to be original in school, I guess you like to think that you're doing something that's worthwhile, but in reality, it seems that everything is basically derived, and and in order to do that, in order to use an imagination or an divination, you have to spend decades of your life learning the skills before you can do so, because mankind is just progressing so quickly. I mean, I wonder if there'll ever be a time when the knowledge that mankind, the knowledge that we need to progress further becomes so archaic that it will take longer than our entire lifetimes in order to learn it. I mean, a couple of centuries ago, you could learn about basically anything really quite easily. Whereas now, if you want to be an expert on a subject, it takes so much time in your life, and obviously our lifespan's not going to increase. It just seems a rather depressing state of affairs to me. It's rather bleak.
It is. I mean, I think you're right, and I think you're right. It is kind of somewhat bleak. You're also right that I guess I'm shifting to DPR here. That to some degree you have to trust that the experts who are debating the subject are going to make up their minds based on the strength of the arguments and the evidence, and that over time they will change, as new evidence is added, that the direction that the vast majority of the opinion of the experts point is almost always going to be probably the right way to go, but with no degree of confidence. And let's set biology aside. Let's say that we were looking at, the most important events that occurred in the year 1820. None of us were around in 1820, so we don't have a time machine yet. I'm working on it, but we don't know what happened in the year 1820. And the historians are the ones who have access to the primary sources of information, the primary documents, the recordings, the later narrative, the evidence on which they base their information, you and I are not going to have access to those primary documents. So we have to make certain assumptions about the veracity of this entire field of history, that these people have sussed this out, that they have either convinced their fellows or not of the accuracy of their primary research. And then it's perfectly acceptable, I think, to go to a reliable source of the information. In the case of medical or biology, you're talking something like Medline. You're retrieving primary documents where people documented their primary research. And maybe you're not even comfortable with that, so you go to a secondary source, a textbook, right? A medical dictionary, a reliable source. But there's never any confidence in those results, even in the primary results. We don't know if the information we're obtaining is true and valid information. And that's the reality we live with. And that's something that science is very comfortable with. Never really knowing for sure. No high degree of confidence. And so instead, in terms of epistemology, we think in terms of falsification. Can this theory be shown not to be true? Can this hypothesis be shown not to be true? So it's quite simple to overturn something that has been believed to be true, but it's quite difficult to ever confirm anything. So our certainty is mostly mapped out in the negative. And I think we can rationally say, we can reasonably say, that since no authority believes that the world was created 6,000 years ago, who is a reliable source, that's probably not the real fact.
Is this a good time to bring up the Dunning-Kruger effect? Because the more I learn about anything, the more it just seems to be true.
Oh, yeah, please do.
Oh, do you want me to explain what the Dunning-Kruger effect is?
Yeah, why not?
Okay, as far as I understand it, the Dunning-Kruger effect is that the relationship between perceived aptitude and actual aptitude, and knowledge is a good example of that. So if we're looking in any sort of given field, well, when you start off learning, it tends to be sort of like, when you start off learning, you don't think you know anything about it. Then you learn a little bit, and you know quite a lot about it. But then the Dunning-Kruger effect kicks in after that, where the more you know, the less you think you know, because you realise how little you actually do know. So you get this sort of false confidence thing where, I mean, the interest, I mean, there have been studies on this, in particularly in the field of intelligence. So the weird thing is that people that have below average intelligence actually think they're above average, whereas rather weirdly, the converse also sometimes applies. But in general, it just seems to be that if you think you know a lot about the subject, the chances are you probably don't, and it just seems it just seems rather depressing in a way, and deprecating.
I'm aware of. I was aware of the Dunning-Kruger effect. I just wanted you to explain it for the benefit of the audience, in case anyone wasn't. There are so many examples of this that I've found over my years on YouTube. People who quite clearly have absolutely no understanding at all about what they're saying, and yet think they can speak with authority about issues such as science. And I think one of the most classic examples of this was probably Werner van X, when he first started it off. Perhaps you could explain away that he was just parroting Kent Hovind's material. I don't know, but if you don't accept that as an example, you can look at the likes of Nephilim Free, someone that quite clearly has absolutely no understanding at all about any of the areas of expertise in relation to science that he claims to have knowledge about, which include evolution, geology, Scientology, and whatever. I mean, it's amazing the areas that he feels so confident that he can address in his videos. I think he's the best example. And maybe other people have got better examples than Nephilim Free, but he's the best one that I can come up with. And Concordance, you've dealt with some of Nephilim's claims and done so in a what some would say was a rather brutal way. But I mean, you pointed out that this bloke has absolutely no idea about the words that he's using, let alone the concept.
Yeah, he was saying no, this isn't a retrotransposon. It's a viral sequence, and of course retrotransposons are viral sequences. That's how they're defined, and it would take someone with any kind of training, any kind of advanced training in molecular biology, hearing that would laugh and say, that's a good joke. But he was deadly serious. He was talking about something he did not understand. He said, no, 80% of proteins are not identical between, 80% of proteins are different between chimpanzees and humans. Well, yes, by one amino acid. But again, it's very hard to get someone to understand things if they have no background. They don't understand that a single amino acid change is something that there are millions of within the human species. So, if we put chimpanzees in a hat and lump them in with Homo sapien, the protein diversity would have been no different in those 80% of cases. So there are a number of things where I can't even explain to him why he's wrong without putting him through a multi-week course. And of course, this is the guy who thinks that autism is a belief in aughts, which is one of my favorite actual quotes from one of his videos. The Dunning-Kruger effect, when it comes to complicated subjects, is less about being more aware of your knowledge as much as it is your confidence in the knowledge. And this is why when a true expert, when a PhD or a Nobel Prize winner or someone in the National Academy talks about a subject, they hedge their bets. And if you've ever read a scientific paper, you know that the wording is always very, very careful, very reserved, may indicate, suggests that. And I find that people view that as wishy-washy, but that's what it is to be on the frontiers of knowledge and always being aware that you could be wrong. Everything you've just seen, and scientists, if they've been in their career long enough, will have the experience of being wrong. How people react to being wrong sort of defines their approach. Do they admit to being wrong internally? Do they overcome that initial discomfort with saying, you know what, I retract this paper, or these conclusions were incorrect, or we were chasing our own tails? Or do they double down? Do they invest even more deeply and become oppositional? And that's when we see experts who fail that basic requirement of admitting to being wrong, which everyone is wrong at one point or another in their field of expertise. Everyone's made a mistake, but there are some people who cannot bring themselves to accept that, and that is the beginning of the path towards denialism, right? That Dunning-Kruger thing affects the entry people, the people who are new to the field, but even the experts sometimes deceive themselves that they are more confident in their conclusions than they should be. So it's not that even experts are exempt from that effect.
I mean, aren't you sort of stuck between a rock and a hard place? Because if you have too low confidence, then you're not going to start. You're not going to do anything because you think you might be wrong before you started. I mean, out of all the scientific models that have been devised, most have been found to be obsolete or debunked or whatever. So it just seems.
Yeah, that's the job. That's the training that we receive as young grad students and postdocs. Is you're trained on a fairly constant basis to challenge your own conclusions, to avoid making strong commitments on, a particular model seems to work, and then you go hunting for ways to falsify that model. It's actually the way that science is set up, and I think this is true of some philosophy as well. It's set up to be self-critical, skeptical. It sets out to expose the flaws in what you've come up with. And I think that's, again, the direct opposite of apologetics. This is anti-apologetics. We seek to falsify our own ideas. We expose our ideas to the possibility of being wrong. And the more daring, the more courageous the prediction, the greater the value of that model if you cannot falsify it. Right? Einstein and relativity is just such a classic example. There were so many very specific predictions that would have been easy to falsify. Right? He started with these very bold ideas. He's overthrowing all of classical physics, and a single experiment could have overturned any of those theories. But the fact that they continued to fail to be falsified is what made them so earth-shattering, so well accepted in modern physics. And the same is true of any idea that we can expose to falsification. Anything that makes a testable prediction. It's the power of that whole process. Is we avoid introducing or increasing our confidence in ideas which have not been subjected to full falsification testing. Right? I could falsify Peter Duisberg tomorrow. I can falsify Andrew Wakefield tomorrow, and people have. Right? The experiments that need to be done are fairly obvious from the predictions that are made. The problem is they don't accept those falsifications. Right? That's what marks them as denialists and not as scientists who made a mistake. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's a really good explanation.
Say for the fact, who are the two people you mentioned?
Andrew Wakefield and Peter Duisberg.
Yeah, and what's their work?
Andrew Wakefield was the MMR guy. He thought MMR caused autism. I don't know about the other one.
Oh, sorry. Peter Duisberg is the leader in HIV/AIDS denialism. He's a professor at UC Berkeley who has his own theory that AIDS is caused by immorality, and HIV is in fact just a passenger virus that just happens to show up when people get AIDS. You know, this is a tenured professor, so they can't fire him. He has published his theories several times. Eventually, people just kind of got tired of him because he's bringing nothing to the table to support these claims. He's got a couple of correlations, but again, people have made the slight effort of falsifying these obviously factually incorrect claims. The same thing, Andrew Wakefield. He became an advocate for this one particular idea, and he was afraid to try to falsify it because he had vested interests in doing so. His livelihood became built around MMR causing autism, at least in some cases, and so he deviated from the proper scientific attitude, which was to do his absolute best to debunk his own theory. Instead, he championed it, he defended it, he altered it. He used what Karl Popper would call a conventionalist twist. That is, he reinvented reasons why the theory shouldn't be falsified. Exceptions, rare cases, those are all the actions of someone who is afraid to expose their idea to falsification.
The guy that sorry,
No, do carry on.
The guy that you said was a tenured professor, the AIDS denialist guy. Surely he won't get through the peer review process. So I mean, aren't they just keeping it? I mean, won't all his papers just be rejected, and he ends up in those open access journals, which no one really cares about?
Yeah, he's had a hard time publishing lately. Now, of course, when he started, in the early days of AIDS in America, at least, his theories were competitive. They were, reasonable explanations for how things were, that, somehow party drugs were going to cause this immunocompromise. and people consider those ideas had equal validity and equal weight at a time when we had no alternative explanations. But over time, other theories were introduced, the viral origins theory, which was a better fit for the data. And along the way, they falsified Peter Duesberg's hypotheses. And the proper scientific thing would have been for him to, tip his hat and say, very well, looks like this problem is well in hand. Let me see if I can contribute in some other way. But instead, he's taken this position that he is a dissident. That he's been the AIDS mainstream is trying to suppress his work. When in fact, it's ridiculous. It's easy to falsify. A grad student in virology would have no problem exposing the flaws in his argument. He does get things published in the sort of predatory type journals, not very often, and he's shifted focus to a cancer theory, which has likewise been falsified, but he's still championing it. And this is the problem maybe with the tenure system, is it allows a certain number of cranks to exist at prestigious institutions like UC Berkeley.
Can you explain it to me? Because I'm from the UK, so I don't really understand what the tenure really means.
I see. Tenure is essentially a lifelong commitment to employment. So the university.
It's not the same in the United Kingdom. If you get to a certain level, professors don't.
I think we might say endowed professor.
I mean, in the UK, a professor is a job title rather than a commitment. I mean, there are professors that move around universities, so I guess professor means something different in the UK, does it?
No, I think it's the same. You have associate professors, assistant professors, and professors, and at some point there's a tenure meeting where the university commits to employment for essentially as long as you like, with only very basic requirements that you continue to show up, that you don't do anything that violates the law or the university's honor code. But it's a way of enticing professors to stay at one institution for the remainder of their career, especially if they bring prestige and notoriety to that university. In the case of UC Berkeley, I think they got the negative side of the notoriety.
There's another positive reason why the tenure system exists. It's also to ensure that a marginal viewpoint that might be correct is not kept out of the intellectual commons entirely, simply because it's less popular. What that means is that someone with a kind of an idea that's a little bit out there with respect to the mainstream within the discipline can just keep chugging away. They keep their job, and they still continue to publish it within or under the auspices of a prestigious university. They are not sort of entirely marginalized, and that's important. If you have an idea, especially in the social sciences and humanities, and also in the arts, I mean, if your work is controversial in some way, without something like the tenure system, you're gone, and we might end up with a kind of academy that that works like theology, where you can only work in this university, you can only work at Biola University or Liberty University, some of these evangelical universities, if you sign on the dotted line and you pledge allegiance to some creed. Well, we don't want something equivalent to that in our secular universities, where there is some unstated creed that you have to abide by, and if your scholarship deviates too far from what is the received wisdom within your discipline, then you're marginalized and thrown out the door, and you find yourself out of a job. So that was part of the reason behind tenure.
I disagree a little bit here, Ozzy. That what you're describing is academic freedom, and at most American universities, at least, they have an academic freedom policy, which sort of spells out that no faculty, whether tenured or not, can be fired simply for stating well-sourced opinions, for stating opinions which are based on primary scholarship. That doesn't necessarily have to do with tenured professors as much as any professor at any level.
No, that's true. But the idea of tenure sort of arose hand in hand with the idea of academic freedom. It was a way of not just attracting prestigious people. I mean, that's sort of the practical day-to-day advantage of tenure. But one of the sort of the ideas behind tenure was also that it would ensure academic freedom, because you're now contractually obligated to keep this person on the payroll, no matter how far out there their arguments and their views are and their research is. And now, of course, the liability of that is you get cranks. That's the downside of this system. But this idea of ensuring academic freedom by ensuring that the person is going to have a place in the university. That was one of the ideas behind tenure. I don't know that it's one of the ideas behind the inception of it, but that has long been one of the rationalizations, or that's putting it prejudicially. It's one of the rationales behind tenure, and it's being more and more challenged.
Seeing as that seems to be a natural pause in the conversation, and given the time, I'd like to take a final caller, if I may. Matthew, I hope you don't mind me saying your first name. I'm sending you a link now to come and join us. I'm not sure how much help we're going to give you. And also, I do want to finish roughly around the 2-hour mark, and I think we started 10 minutes late, so I do want to mention the charity event that's going to be taking place in 2 weeks' time. But hopefully we'll be joined by another caller. So far as I understand, slightly off topic though, it's a shame you've got to go, Concordance, because you're the only one I thought would be able to really give any constructive help to this person, if indeed he joins us. Matthew, are you going to join us? I know it takes a few moments between sending someone a link and then actually joining in the Hangout. Let's see where we get to.
I had something to say. Oh, never mind. He's here.
Hi. Yes, what have you got for us, sir?
One sec. To ask me for
Spiny Norman, is that you that's calling me?
Yeah.
All right. You don't need to call me. You're online. What have you got for us?
Well, in freshman year, I started rereading the Bible for myself, and I kind of thought, wow, this is making no sense to me. And I talked to my father about it, and he's telling me you're reading it the wrong way. And I told him, how do you read the Bible the wrong way, the way it's written? And I don't see how it can be read the wrong way. So I told my father I was an atheist a while back, and me and him have been having discussions, and I've been quoting Bible verses that seem to be out of place or either just contradict each other so badly that I don't see how anyone could not see it. And I'm just wondering, and he keeps telling me I'm either reading it the wrong way or I need a better understanding, and I just don't know how to talk to him, because he won't treat me like an adult. He'll treat me as a son that doesn't know much. So I don't know what to do.
Well, as I said, I'm not sure how much help we're going to be able to give you. I certainly can't, and I'll tell you why. I was brought up in a family with very little religious teachings at all, and so when I sort of like realised for myself that I was an atheist, I was maybe about 12 or 13 years old. I didn't really have to come out in front of my family because we never really discussed it, but they were pretty atheist as well. I mean, it was just simply not a topic that was discussed at our home. So I'm not able to help you. I'm not sure that, I don't know, but I suspect that Ozzy's experience was pretty much the same. The only person I can imagine would be of help, and Ozzy, if you have got help, please chip in, but the only person I would have thought would be helpful is Concordance, who I know has to disappear in a few moments' time, and I'm not sure he's even still with us. Concordance, are you still with us?
I'm here.
Yeah. Have you got any advice?
You have to start with the basics. What are your goals, and what are you hoping through your exchange with your father to get?
I just want my father to, he keeps trying to make me go to church again and talk with the pastor, and I don't think that's just not going to work, because I feel like it's just going to spew out the same thing my father's going to say to me. And I've read the Bible twice so far, and I kind of see the many inconsistencies with it, and I've been doing a lot of research by myself to show, like, either if I'm just reading it wrong, and I'm not apparently, and I just want my father to accept that I'm an atheist. I'm open to the evidence that there might be a God, but I just want him to help me out, want him to accept me.
I'm so sorry to throw this.
I think you focus on that. Hang on. I think you focus on your relationship and try to keep the theology stuff out of it. I mean, I understand this is a real problem for him, but I don't think anything will be found in the Bible or in your interpretation of the Bible that will fix that. I think it has to be, a relationship between you and your father, and you guys maybe have to have a real heart-to-heart about the fact that you're an independent person, that you've got your own religious views, that this is not something that's going to be an easy conversation to have, because I'm sure this is going to be upsetting to him, and you try to see it from his perspective and do your best to have a meeting of the minds. I would consider all of the theology, all the Bible study stuff to just be a complete red herring, not pertinent to the real issue here, which was definitely going to be you and your father working this out.
Well, me and my father don't have such a what's it called? It's not a big issue, but to him, I don't think it's a big issue, but to him, he thinks my view is just a bit skewed, and I don't see why it really hurts him, because I've always seen my father as a accepting kind of person, but I kind of see how he has some different views of the world than I do, and sometimes they might just get in the way a bit.
Well, I can tell you my dad is recently told me that he's kind of come around to more of an atheistic worldview as well, having grown up in a Christian Science household as he did. He got some of the worst extremes of religion. Christian Science, in case you don't know, disavow the use of any kind of medicine. So they are sort of a faith healing group. Yeah, and they follow, I consider it something of a cult with Mary Baker Eddy, in this sort of belief that the world is all an illusion, that the only thing that's real is God, and that you communicate into this reality of God. But there were times where he didn't get medicine where he should have, and that really upsets me thinking back on it. He was upset with me. He eventually converted to Christianity, and Presbyterianism was the church he went to. Over time, his views changed. I think that's probably true for everyone, is that everyone's views change, and you have to make that clear that this is not some irrevocable position that you'll have for all time. You're at a place where you are now, and he should give you the freedom to express that and be that and explore this. And I think if he's a good dad, he'll listen. You just have to say it in a non-threatening way.
I have, but I think it's just going to take a lot more time.
Yeah, you're right.
I kind of wanted to ask you guys, see what your advice would be if you guys have been through the situation before.
My situation was a little bit similar to yours. Yeah, my situation was a little closer to yours, Matthew. I grew up in a fundamentalist household, quasi-Jehovah's Witness. My mother was very distressed when I started doubting my faith, and specifically questioning the Bible, because I grew up in a home where the Bible was the final authority. So to question the Bible just seemed like madness. Now, I tumbled out of my faith quite young. I was about 17, 18 by the time I realized, I'm an atheist. but in the couple of years leading up to that, there was a lot of tension. And in my case, it wasn't good, actually. I pushed it a little too hard, and my mother never actually, to her dying day, really never made her peace with the fact that I was an atheist. You know, this was quite a heartbreaking thing for her. So, yeah, I think you should heed Concordance's advice here. Your relationship with your father is going to be much more important to you than sort of being right in this. And I know you didn't put it in those terms, but just, you know, that is a worry, that is a concern. You know, you're a young man, you're growing up, you're becoming sort of autonomous in your thinking, and you want to be respected, and you for your own ideas. But there's a danger here that you can sort of create a rift that only widens with time, rather than sort of being a temporary rift that heals easily. I mean, it can go very, very badly. However, one thing I can recommend is if you think you're reading things correctly with respect to the Bible, and the people around you are reading it wrong, you don't have to get into fights with these people. You don't have to go about trying to deconvert them. And any effort that you make trying to assert your view is going to sound to them like a deconversion attempt. And for them, the stakes are high. You said it yourself. You know, it's not a big deal for you, but for them, it's probably a big deal. You know, maybe heaven or hell hangs in the balance for their son as they see it. So it is something that they need to worry about. So what I would recommend, though, is if you want people to respect your opinion, so that they at least think, you know what, my son here, I disagree with him, but he's not. This is not a mere act of rebellion on his part. Sorry for the background noise. What you should do is inform yourself, and what that means is read the relevant scholarship. Go out and pick up a book like Who Wrote the Bible by Richard Elliott Friedman. That is a standard introductory college-level course on the history of the Bible and how to read the Bible. I mean, this is how biblical scholars look at the Bible. Okay. You can read books like Bart Ehrman's Misquoting Jesus on the subject of the New Testament. You can read books like Silberman and Finkelstein's The Bible Unearthed is what it's called. I mean, reading the Bible and rereading the Bible actually doesn't help much, because the Bible is not self-interpreting. It's a series of books written by people over centuries, frankly, who practice different religions. There wasn't one religion. This is not the work of one religion over time. This is an evolving set of religions. This is a religious tradition. This is a set of religious religions within a tradition. And so of course it's full of inconsistencies and errors. We should expect it to be. And consequently, it's actually hard to understand what's going on in the Bible. It's making reference to things that we're not supposed to know or understand. It's not written for us. So the best thing I would recommend for you is actually inform yourself on what biblical scholars actually think about the Bible, what archaeologists think about that period of history, what historians think about that period of history, what textual critics think about the Bible, so that when you're reading the Bible, you are understanding what the Bible is, irrespective of what your father thinks. And so that when you have those discussions with him, it's not a question of having ammunition, it's a question of you actually have the courage of your convictions, that you know that you have in fact done your due diligence. You have studied this work and you understand it in its proper context, and understand it having been informed by what the best minds of our civilization have to say on the matter. And that's the way to proceed. You know, don't try to deconvert them, and don't try to say things that are going to make them think that you're trying to deconvert them, and it's going to be heartbreaking. You know, and who knows? You might find you might come out of this an atheist. You might come out of it an agnostic. You might come out of it a Christian again, or some other flavor of theist. I mean, as long as you're sort of being rational and responsible in your information gathering, that's the most important thing. But as long as you come off that way, as having been serious about it, your father, I think, will at least be able to respect that this is not some mere act of rebellion, which I think is probably is operative there, and he's worried for you. Hope that's of some help.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. You guys have been really good help. I've been trying to look for some people to help me out, but it seems that you guys kind of helped out a little. Thank you.
Thank you
Oh,
very
you're
much
welcome.
indeed for your call.
All right. Bye.
I'm sorry. Yes, thank you. I just don't know how to help people in that situation because I've really not been in it. But it must be an awful one. And also, I have to apologise to you. I've forgotten that you actually were brought up in a religious environment. I totally forgot that, which is why I thought I'd go to concordance to answer the question first.
Oh, it's okay.
I've never had
Most
to go
people.
through it. I've never had to think that I was going to lose friendship, job opportunities, lose sort of like relationship with my family on the basis of religious grounds. It's just something that I wouldn't say totally, but on the whole is not something that happens in this country because atheism is just theism is simply a background noise. Very few people are so religious that they would actually lose friends and family over it.
One of the reasons why I talk anonymously online like this is because these are the sorts of conversations I don't want to have IRL because there's a risk that they'll always rock the boat. So this sort of conversation that I'm having now is one that I would very much avoid having IRL for that reason.
So you'd avoid the conversation with what?
So I would generally do my best to avoid conversations about religion in real life. So this is one of my motivations for doing things like this, because I can have these conversations, and I do this mostly because I enjoy it rather than any bigger motive. But I generally stay away from talking about religion in day-to-day life because it can just or even just politics, because it can just sometimes it can cause problems, and people sometimes overreact, or I think so there has to be a certain amount of, you just have to accept that people are going to react like that sometimes, I guess.
Okay. On that note, I'm going to start bringing the show to an end. So, Quantum, thank you very much for your contribution. I can either kick you or can throw yourself on your sword. Yeah, there we go. Ozzy, thank you very much for your contribution. I'm going to spend 2 minutes, perhaps, if even that, talking about the charity event, which is organised for 2 weekends' time. It starts on the 6th of September, 4:30 British summer time. It's 24 hours, non-stop, in support of MSF, Doctors Without Borders. It's now going to be the 6th year that this event has taken place. And I very much encourage everyone to support this event. I had set up the Hangout in the way that I thought it would work over the 24 hours. It's not happening quite as I want, and if I have seemed distracted during the course of this show, it's because I'm playing around with things to see what's working, what's not working, and what links we can add and whatever. Google Hangouts, which is where it's going to be broadcast, it's not as user-friendly as I hoped it was going to be. There are still a few issues that I've got to resolve. But what I will certainly do is post in the links to the YouTube channel where this has been posted, the links to the schedule for the event, which I hope you'll find interesting, and links to where you'll be able to see it on Google Hangouts. It's too late to change the whole thing, but there are certain aspects of this which I and others have expressed frustration with. It's, as I say, not quite working out, but what I'll probably do is post a video on YouTube the next few days explaining how everything's going to work as best I can. But please, it's 24 hours for the charity. We've got some very interesting people coming on. YouTube users, and also other people that may be more famous, such as we've got James Randi. I think we've almost secured for definite Lawrence Krauss during the Skeptic Fences show contribution. We've certainly got Matt Dillahunty. We've got the delightful Seth Andrews, the Thinking Atheist. We've got Darwin, and we've also, as I say, we've got some wonderful YouTube users, including Dragnet, who, and as I said before on the previous show, he's going to be having a debate with G-Man, which is one of the highlights, I think. Anyway, 24 hours non-stop in support of the tragedy for the 6th year running, and we've raised over the last 5 years, I think, somewhere over between $125,000 to $150,000. So I invite everyone to look at the links that I'll post in the description for this. Please advertise the show as best you can using whatever social media that you have. Also, more importantly, of course, donate and seek others to donate as well. That would be fantastic. Apart from that, Ozzy, any final words?
No, except that I'm honored to be participating in this charity drive, and so I will be making and uploading a video shortly myself promoting it. So hopefully a lot of people will watch and they'll donate.
Thank you very much indeed. On that note, I think that brings us pretty much to 2 hours. So there we go. Thank you very much for everyone for watching, and come and join us. 2 weeks' time, 24 hours for MSF, Doctors Without Borders, the most wonderful charity in the world. You cannot fault this charity. It is awesome. And we will see you then. 4:30, British summertime. Come and join us. Bye.